they're in the mental health space, specifically with men, and you guys are on an adventure, something new. And I think kind of kicking off our time, I like to have context of like, how did you get to be the person that you are sitting in this chair today? And, there's two of you. So we definitely want to hear from both of you. So I want to make sure we get all the context we need. But then again, there's two of you. So, I don't want to make this like 90 hours long. So anyways, Jamie, would love to hear from you, kind of like your background, your childhood, maybe when you came to faith, and kind of how you got started in the therapy space.
Okay.
Big question.
Yeah.
You have 2 minutes.
2 minutes, yeah.
All right.
Let's knock this out.
Starting now.
Yeah. Background. I'm from North Carolina. I am one of 5 kids and grew up.
Get that?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm the 4th out of the 5.
Okay.
Grew up in a Christian home. Grew up with the kind of dad who's like at the table reading his Bible every morning. Like, definitely had a role model of what it looks like to be intentional about your faith. And when I came to faith, that's kind of like the church kid thing of, I don't know, so I'm going to recommit my life at most camps just to be safe.
Uh-huh.
You need that fire insurance.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Fire insurance. I love that.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, the first time I remember dedicating my life is at a Promise Keepers event.
Oh, wow.
So
Wow.
You're a real man.
a true legend of the faith over here.
Yeah. You have a pillar at the table.
Yeah, right.
I should leave.
Yeah, right.
Not worth it.
Right. My dad took me to a Promise Keepers with, I think, a couple of my brothers. I was just stoked to be around the men of my church, feeling like I was included in that.
Mhm.
I don't even know how old I was. I think I was maybe 10 or 11. What I do know is that it was, I had no idea what I was committing to. So I want to give you a lot of context, but I'll try to give it 30,000 foot. When I was 11, a youth pastor moved to my church. He started living with my family. And because my parents did that with a lot of like anybody who was coming to work at our church didn't have initially a place to stay. We had like a basement apartment.
Okay.
So often it was missionaries who were staying with us while they were like stateside.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, it was actually probably more often it was youth interns who were coming to work at our church for like a summer. And that was kind of the case with this guy. And I'm not going to say his name because it's not worth my time. But he started working at our church and became really ingrained with my family. I was homeschooled at the time, which we were joking about earlier. I don't know how my mom homeschooled 5 kids. That seems like insanity to me.
Super
Yeah.
I don't understand that.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
So we were all...
Wait, before you... What's the age differences like with all your siblings?
Great question.
Yeah.
I was not on purpose. So
Oh.
very compact. 5 kids under the age of 6.
Oh.
Holy.
Yeah. My dad calls it the brain dead years.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
I cannot
So
even
why
imagine.
does he call it that? I'm kidding.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Confused.
But you were not supposed to happen, but then they had another one.
Yeah, correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
We make some family jokes about that.
Wow.
My mom calls us her unexpected blessings.
Both.
Okay.
Both of us.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
Well, they intended to have 2, from what I understand, and it went oldest boy girl twins.
Oh.
Well,
Yeah. So
amplified
immediately
things.
over the line,
Yeah.
and then me, and then my younger brother. So
Mm.
the gap of the 4 is like evenly 2.
Mhm.
But that put all 5 of us under the age of 6.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is
Cannot
incredible.
imagine that.
That's a
and
lot.
she homeschooled.
And she homeschooled
Okay.
all of us.
All right. I just
Yeah.
needed that. I needed that.
Yeah.
Picture.
No, that's great. because it
How did
definitely
she drive around? Did you like grow up in a limousine?
right
Like
right
how did she fit
the
all
classic old school Dodge Caravan.
Heck yeah.
That's what
dude.
y'all had?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
Not
awesome.
the wood-sided one, but like 91 blue Dodge
Yes.
Caravan.
Yes.
Yeah, come on.
Literally the same thing.
Yeah,
Do you-
that's
how many
wild.
siblings do you have?
I'm one of 5.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Okay.
Yeah. But
What's-
there's a 13-year gap between the oldest and youngest, so it's very, very different. Like
Okay.
What's the makeup of male, female in your family?
we had 4 boys and then a girl.
That's the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah. Boy, girl, boy, boy, boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Wow.
yeah. So I went to public high school, but I was homeschooled. We were all homeschooled 1st through 8th.
Okay.
Well, whatever. Basically that. And
No, I want all the details.
yeah. I think it was kind of the thing of progressively deciding that homeschooling was the idea. So the oldest didn't go in first.
Okay.
Got
Like
it.
I think he went to like all the way to the 4th grade
Sure.
almost.
Okay.
And then it was like, this is not the move. And then, so Todd, I wasn't going to say his name. He moves in and lives with my family for a bit, starts working at our church, and ultimately becomes our youth pastor. He was a youth intern first, ultimately becomes our youth pastor. He had like a traveling ministry as well. And my oldest brother and him get pretty tight. And to the point of like calling each other best friend. I kind of idolized him, as often kids do with their youth pastor.
yeah.
Oh,
You know,
for sure.
Um,
Instantly put on a pedestal.
yeah, he's
Yeah.
like super athletic, really intelligent, and older for a youth pastor. Like I think when he started as an intern, he was 36 maybe,
Oh wow.
but still like the quintessential. That's the guy that I want to be. Ultimate frisbee was huge in my family,
Oh,
Yep.
yeah.
and he was good at that, and I wanted to be great at that. So, yeah, really idolized him. Ended up like he was the youth pastor for all of my middle school and high school time, and kind of, without getting too far into the weeds of it, what ends up happening over those 8 years is like 4 years of progressive grooming and then 4 years of abuse. I mean, that's a stark delineation. It's probably interwoven a little more
Sure.
than that, but I can point to events
Mm-hmm.
at each year that feel progressively more destructive. And so the ultimate question is, how did I get here? At the beginning of college, so I went to public high school, ended up loving that, graduate, go to a big public university. NC State, shout out, Final Four run. It was magical. And in college, I was like unsure what I wanted to do. So I started like pre-med and then thought I wanted to do music. Really decided to do music and ended up moving here to Nashville. On and off in Nashville all of that time. But the reason that really matters is because on the way here, moving to Nashville the first time, I'm still in relationship with this youth pastor. He calls me unequivocally his best friend at this point. Has really like inserted himself into my life in a very dominant, time-wise way. And I've started dating my now wife at this time, and he has strong feelings about her. Multiple occasions told me she was dragging me to hell. And on the first drive here, my mom had just been on a missions trip to Honduras. Sorry, Mom, if I got the country wrong. But somewhere where she had to have sexual abuse training, somewhere where it's really prevalent. And so during that training, she said she felt like the Holy Spirit asked her to ask me if I was being abused.
Holy cow.
And in my family growing up, that was not something that
Wasn't
we
anything you talked about.
Yeah, it's not like anti by any means, but I grew up Presbyterian.
The abuse part or the Holy Spirit?
Holy Spirit.
Okay.
Sorry, thank you for pointing that out.
Okay.
Holy Spirit. Yeah, I grew up Presbyterian, deeply theological, and not as spiritual.
Sure. Yeah.
And there's a lot of great things about that. And then
Mhm.
also one of the things that came out of that is that when my mom said the Holy Spirit asked me to ask you, it felt very powerful to me.
Yeah.
And in that moment, it was like physical wool was pulled back from my eyes. And I was
Mhm.
like, this is what's happening.
Mm.
And
Wow.
I just like, I'm driving on I-40 to get here from North Carolina.
Yeah.
I had to pull off the road because I couldn't see because I was sobbing.
Mm.
And like, it shattered me. And I would say to speed up a little bit, I stayed shattered for a while.
Mm.
I tried a couple of things to come back together. I would say that it felt like God very much wouldn't let me out of his hand, and annoyingly so.
Mm.
I worked for this producer named Ed Cash. 3 days after that car ride, I started working for him, and we were working on Chris Tomlin's Burning Lights record. And the first song that we worked on, and the song we worked on for the next 4 months, was whatever it's even called, but it's the one that talks about, I know who goes before me, I know who stands behind, the God of angel armies is always by my side.
Yeah.
Heard that every day, 5 days a week,
Mm.
for 4 months,
Wow.
3 days after all this comes out.
Yeah.
So, like, annoyingly so, where I would have preferred to just rage.
Mhm.
He wouldn't let me go.
You felt like he was pursuing you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know that I would have even labeled it that at the time. I think I just kind of clung to religiousness at the
Yeah.
time as like, I need safety. I feel undone. And I clung to being a perfect Christian for a bit.
Sure.
That was part of me being shattered.
Okay.
And I get married to my wife 3 years after that. We dated all of college and then end up getting married. And during that time, I just got progressively more into addiction. I kind of already had an issue with porn to that point and developed a really debilitating addiction to it out of this experience. And just stayed there into my marriage
Yeah.
and got to the point where I was just numb. I would say to Elizabeth, I'd be like, I either feel angry or nothing. Those are the two things I experience.
Wow.
And so ultimately, kind of at her encouragement and the encouragement of a friend of ours, Sammy, and her husband, Mike, kind of just decided, I'm going to try this counseling thing again because Elizabeth was having a positive experience with it. And so was our friend Sammy. And I had already had a pretty negative experience with it right
okay.
after, like the church I grew up at wanted me to go to counseling and I just wasn't ready.
Yeah.
Had nothing to do with the counselor, nothing to do with any of that.
Right.
I just wasn't ready. I did not want to be healed. I wanted to be angry, and I hated that people wanted me to be healed already.
Totally.
Yeah. Not allowing you to feel
Yeah,
the
that's
pain,
what
the
it
real
felt
pain
like.
of it, kind of.
Yeah, I think they wanted me to feel the pain of it and move through it, but the way it felt to me was that they wanted me to get past it.
Yeah, they
Quicker
didn't-
than you
they
were
didn't
able to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was really angry.
Yeah.
So I think I get married, still in addiction, end up trying counseling at this place in Nashville called the Refuge Center. And man, had a counselor there named Jared. Jared, man, I hope you hear this somehow. Jared changed my life. He was just present. Like, he didn't say anything really spectacular. He helped me determine what I was feeling and helped me find out what was in the way. And for me, that was addiction was in the way of me knowing what I felt. And there's other things now that get in my way, but, that at the time was, debilitating.
Yeah.
And so I got into recovery for that because of Jared. He was like, you should try this. And I was like, no. And then for 5 months, every week, he was like, you should try this. And I was like, no. And finally, December 1st, 2017, I decided to try. Went to my first meeting. My now sponsor ran my first meeting and made sure that I got his number and called him afterwards. And he's been my sponsor ever since.
Wow.
And kind of through that work, realized without telling Blake's story, through that work, I found my best friend. And through that work, I found who I am. And through that work, I got to see why my relationship with the Lord was shattered and what I needed to deconstruct it, which I know is kind of like a hot
topic.
It's a
It's a
buzzword for
buzzword.
sure.
Yeah.
But like deconstruct it for the purpose of finding why it hurt, and then building it back for the purpose of growing closer.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of starting from scratch a little bit.
Yeah. And kind of one thing that I mentioned to you guys before, kind of like one of God's divine kindnesses is like Todd told me that Elizabeth was dragging me to hell, and I'm gonna cry. One thing that is beautiful about God is He is really into particularities.
Yep.
And my wife leads 350 kids to the Lord every week now. She's a pastor, a youth pastor.
Yeah.
That's really redemptive to me.
Yeah. For sure.
At times it's annoying, but I think overall it's very redemptive.
Yeah.
So, through my work, I found like I'm not numb because I'm unemotional. I'm numb because I have so many emotions that I have to really use a lot to numb them out.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's like, you just saw, like it's beautiful now. I'm trying to hold it back so it doesn't get in the way of me telling this story, but like I have really deep, rich emotion.
Yeah.
And leaning into it has been a healing thing for me, and it led me to go back to school to be a therapist. And now that's the work that I do. And there's a lot of particularities along the way and jobs along the way that have shaped who I am. Did blue collar work, cutting down trees for a while, and even the metaphor of like that was how God pruned who I am while I'm actively doing real pruning.
Yep.
Was kind of
Kind of mirrored the soul work you were doing.
yeah, like the company I worked for, Chop Nashville. Those guys were pivotal to me becoming the man that I am now, and kind of shaped even like who I love working with as a therapist. I love working with blue collar guys.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of who I am and how I came to be here in a 30,000 foot view.
Yeah. There's a million stories in between the beginning and today.
Yeah.
But yeah, I appreciate you sharing kind of the highlights.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Blake, what would you say are like the highlight reels or the kind of the significant moments for you?
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, dude.
Which we'll talk about it, I'm sure, but I think you mentioned earlier, over the last 8 years, maybe, cumulatively, there's been maybe like 2 months in those 8 years, not as a 2 months in a row, but as a cumulative
Total number of days
that we haven't talked on the phone or texted that day. So obviously, like I know so much of that story and the intricacies of that story and the complexities of it that maybe weren't even shared, but to hear it in that 30,000 foot, like there's something so healing, even of being able to tell it in that way.
Which is part of the purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I love
seriously.
that. Yeah. Because it's like you look at the whole picture and you're like, oh my God, because you're living in the complexities of it.
Yeah.
But to look at it in this kind of like narrative format is
It helps you see God's hand over your life as a whole, I think.
Yeah. And how like redemptive he's been in your story.
Yeah, hugely. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, grew up in a very different household than him, very different family. I'm the oldest of 3 by a good number. My sister is 9 years younger than me. My brother's 11 years younger than me.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I think after me, they had wanted to have another kid, and it took a while. And then they had my sister, and then my brother was kind of not on purpose. So same parents. A lot of people think that I have that they may be step siblings, but full blood siblings.
Yeah.
And grew up also in a Christian home. I never remember not being in church. I started playing the drums when I was like 2 or 3, just because we would hang around after church, and I would go up and like bang on the drum set.
I love the drums so much.
Yeah.
Just let me go wild.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I still to this day will like play in church and stuff, and that was a big part of my story. So grew up in church, and kind of like you meant, like got dedicated my life to the Lord at some point, when I was younger, and then again in high school, and then again in college, and then again in college. Kind of like you were mentioning, like, did I do this right the first time?
Yeah.
Am I in?
I have
Am I in?
sinned since that last time.
Yeah.
I should probably do this again.
Yeah.
Quick checkup.
Right. So my parents, just even as I'm learning more now, like still the layers of it, just had a very difficult marriage. I think in some ways from the beginning, and I'm going forward a little bit, but to come back, like my dad had 3 affairs over a period of time that eventually came out. I don't know exactly the timeline of when that started, but there was just always, they had a lot of issues.
Sure.
And some that they had worked on, and some others that just kept being present. And so then I think this is all my kind of perspective and like theory now as a therapist, when I came along, I think in some ways I was like a distraction from that.
Sure.
And they just weren't emotionally connected, intimate. And then when my siblings came, my mom, she's a bigger personality, and my dad is the opposite. He's quiet, reserved. And it turns out, like, what I know now is like he was in active addiction for a long time. And so, like, of course, you can't be present in your family in the way that your spouse needs or that your kids needs when you're in active addiction.
Yeah.
That's not being dealt with. And so I was very lonely as a kid, and lots of stories that I could get into, sexual abuse, younger, and discovering porn early, like single-digit age probably from friends.
Yeah,
and
same.
Wow.
Yeah.
which is, I mean,
Scary.
so scary, but also common. Like even nowadays, like
Yeah.
that number is
Even
earlier.
Right. Yep.
And my dad was in a similar addiction, so that wasn't like, we didn't talk about that kind of
Right.
stuff.
Yeah.
So I just learned all of it from these other people, and that set my, like, pretty early on, parts of me that learned to use certain things, porn, people even, like, in a way to escape or distract from what was really going on, which was just deep loneliness and like kind of like you mentioned, like lots of feelings that I didn't know were there or know how to walk through or process. With my siblings being so much younger and my parents not having healthy connection, this often happens in family systems where a child, sometimes particularly the older child, is going to fill in some roles just unintentionally, just because the system has to operate and function in a way that it's supposed to, even if it's unhealthy. And so I became that role in some ways as a father figure, which I'm not going to get into intricacies of how that showed out just for the sake of time, or how that played out. And in the process of that, as a kid, and when I say kid, I even mean like teenager, you can't be filling some of those roles and be an independent teenager.
Yeah,
like your brain is
true.
not even developed enough to be able to differentiate, this isn't my role.
Yeah.
And so you lose agency in, it's very traumatic in some ways. I mean, we talk about trauma on like a scale, and there's, big T, little t, however you would want to say it. But like, the way I think of it is like the essence of trauma is it like strips somebody of their own agency. Would probably say that's very true for you in the story you shared.
Big time, yeah.
And so that can happen in ways like that, which are very like damaging and overt, and it can happen in very subtle ways, even in the family system, where you just lose some of your agency, and then all this other stuff is happening kind of behind the scenes to try to find some sort of life. So anyways, just very lost. I was born in Kentucky. We moved to Illinois when I was 2 or 3. Grew up there, so developed friendships. And there's lots of stories of like bullying happened there really bad for me. So I had like a group of friends, but even the friends that I had, I didn't have like friendship in the way that maybe I hope for my kids to have. And then we moved from Illinois back to Kentucky at the beginning of my 8th grade year, which was it's what needed to happen. And developmentally, it's just like a terrible time to move other states. So now I'm back in the place that I'm from, yet I don't have any relationships because I grew up with all of these kids in Illinois, and now I'm a northerner in the southern place, and so there's different forms of bullying there, but also I was really good at sports, and so that kind of became an identity, as well as just relationship with girls, and my addiction that started out as just pornography progressed into acting out with other people. And so high school, I always say that like high school freshman year to senior year, really 4 years, was like probably some of the worst times of my life, just because there was so much going on. So my dad's affairs came out. My mom and brother and sister had to move back to Illinois because of some things. So it was just my dad and I, and we don't have really a connection. And so I'm just getting into even more things. And just really like existing.
Just trying to survive.
Just trying to survive. All the while, still in youth group, alone, still in youth group, still drumming, still like, the classic double life thing. And there was one like pretty significant marker in my story is my junior year. I think it was the summer before my junior year. I had been on spring break and was dating a girl and cheated on that girl with one of her friends, and she knew, but of course there was just so much like shame that was not dealt with, and so I'm still participating in the things that give me shame, but also denying that I am participating in those things. And so I had gotten back, and she had found out, and kind of we were talking about it, and I was just doing everything I could to convince her that it wasn't true. Just even more hiding. Even though I was exposed, I'm still trying to hide.
Deceiving yourself first.
Yes, And I remember leaving her house, driving back to this is in Kentucky, driving back to my house, and it was just this overwhelm of that was just like the tipping point. This overwhelm of emotion from everything else that had just been like suppressed that couldn't be suppressed much longer, and it just all came out, and I didn't know what to do with it because I don't have language of feelings.
You weren't taught that.
I don't know what's happening in my body. I don't even really have a safe person to go to and say like, I don't know what's going on. So it just culminated to this point of like, this is so overwhelming. I don't know what to do. And I was maybe 5 minutes away from my house. And there was this, I knew the route. There was this huge tree. You probably would know what kind of tree it was. I don't remember. But there was this like very big tree on the side of the road. And I had this fleeting thought as I drove past it of like, I could just drive into that tree. And it was just a fleeting thought, and I kept going. But then I turned around in a parking lot and went back
Wow.
and turned around in another parking lot. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do it this time. And I did that probably 3 or 4 times.
Wow,
and at one point, I even stopped in the parking lot to call my mom and say, hey, just let you know I'm on my way home. I'll be there in a few minutes, which I had never, that wasn't like a rule. I had a lot of freedom. And so I never had to do that. But there was this part in me that was like, this is probably going to be the last phone call. So I'm just going to call and say, like, love you. I'll be home soon.
Wow.
Which I've never, that wasn't a thing we did.
Yeah.
And then I remember driving back. And then I remember kind of like coming to in the ditch and the airbags out and smoke and
Wow.
kind of like crawling out of the car on the road. And it was late, so there wasn't much traffic, and somebody drove by and saw me and helped me call my mom.
Wow.
And I mean, I'm just like right around the corner from my house.
Wow.
And even then, like, you would think, most people would think that would be a pretty pivotal, like, okay, things changed after that. And they did in some ways, but they didn't. Because I still was, I not only have this kind of, if I could use this phrase, like legacy burden of, which is a kind of technical term that we use of like, you just hide. Like, that's what my dad was doing. There's lots of stories in his family and even in my mom's family of like, that's just what you do.
Yep.
So even in that, like, the narrative that I created was that my phone fell in the console and I went down to get it, and the ditch caught my tire and it, drove off. And like, even to my parents and all my friends. And so I still was like even hiding from that. And that was, so my senior year was really just a blur. My parents had separated technically my sophomore year, which was when my dad's first affair came out, and then subsequent others followed. And I just didn't know what I was going to do with my life because there was not, there's this image. We're on a podcast, so I can't like visually play it out. But this image that I saw one time that was really helpful, that's like your home is where you go and it's safe. It's not perfect, but it's safe, and you can talk about things, and the people in that place help you become aware of what's in you and name it. And then you go out into the world, and then like you get hurt and you're lonely and people are mean and there's evil and whatever. And then you come back home and then you talk about what it was like out there, and it's kind of this refuge. And then you go back out, and then that happens again. And that's just like kind of a process, not a perfect one, but like an ideal process. But when you don't have that home base, and some of those things that I just said that happen out here are happening in that place, there's like nowhere to go.
Right.
So you're just kind of like existing.
Yeah.
Of course.
There's no outlet.
No.
Yeah.
So I made it, or the outlet is very unhealthy ones that you find that just cause even more damage.
There's no healthy outlet.
Yeah. So I made it to college because I played football, and I was decent enough at it that I got a scholarship. And I went to a small school called Lindsey Wilson College in Kentucky. And when I left, or when I went there my freshman year, I was just like, peace out. Like, I am not consciously, but subconsciously, I was like, I'm not going back to that. And so I did things over the summer. I never really went back home. And I had this kind of shift in college, this like 180-degree turn where I got involved in campus ministry, stopped doing a lot of the things that I was doing, and like some of the unhealthy things. And looking back on it, like God really was working in my heart in ways that I wasn't aware. But there was still 3%, which I'm sure we'll get into what that means, that was that only I knew about. And so there was change, but there was still hiding. And I didn't know what I was going to do, so I was like, I'll get a degree in Christian ministries because that sounds pretty easy. from what everybody's saying, which it was. I mean, there's truth to that. It was easy compared to like a business degree.
Yeah.
Not trying to go through chemistry or anything.
Yeah. So did that, got involved in a local church there, which I'm not going to name, but it was, for me, a pretty harmful place in some ways. And so when I got behind the scenes of that, I was like, this isn't what I want to be a part of. I had met my wife while I was there. She didn't go to the school, but a friend of hers did, connected us. So my senior year, I actually I'd stopped playing football because there were some things that happened there, which is a whole nother podcast to talk about, that were abusive and
Somebody else's solution.
Yeah. And so I stopped playing football because I'd also gotten hurt. It's just like, this isn't.
Yeah.
Wide receiver / kicker, a dynamic athlete.
Punter.
Oh.
Wow.
That's impressive.
Yeah. It was a small school, so we couldn't, I guess, afford just a punter.
Yeah.
We had 4 punters.
Were you the facilities guy too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Our first and second string punter were both receivers, and then the third and fourth string punters were the kickers. If that kind of tells you what we could.
And that's how you got hurt, right?
Yeah, I got hurt punting. Anyway, so I stopped playing football, and I finished my senior year of undergrad online, and I moved to Nashville because I didn't really have a place to go back to, or a place I wanted to go back to. My wife was here. Nashville seemed cool. Started working for my father-in-law, who is a local artist, and ended up managing his gallery and worked there for probably 6 years. And when we started dating, it was the first relationship really where I was like, I want to do this right, not the way that I've been doing relationship for my whole life.
Yep.
She had grown up in counseling, Daystar, which is the staple in Nashville. Yeah. Shout out. It's an amazing place.
Yeah,
she had grown
incredible.
up there, so it was familiar to her.
Cool.
And
Not a sponsor.
no, not yet. She had so it was kind of like it wasn't required, but it was encouraged that like I do some work. And so I started going into counseling and learning just a lot more about my family dynamic and how that
You're
is.
like, whoa.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm like, I thought this was normal. And he's like, it is to you, but that doesn't mean that it's okay.
Yeah.
Normal's a myth anyway. But it was my experience. That's all I knew.
Yep.
Right.
And so got involved in counseling. And then kind of similar, my counselor was like, this thing that you're saying you struggle with, like this is not just a moral dilemma that you struggle with, pornography, sex addiction, all of those things that are typically, especially in church circles, talked about as a moral, like if you come in and you're like an alcoholic, they're like, let's get you help. If you're like, I struggle with porn, they're like, let's put you in an accountability group and read this book and like you need to pray more.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not coming along to fix the root of the problem.
Right. Which there are many roots.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so he kind of encouraged a similar thing. I went to a sort of a treatment center and then got involved in recovery. So just this whole new world of like really starting to engage my story and the depths of it, and found so much healing in that. Met him in the process. Our friendship developed and became something that we both needed, and a type of friend that we never really had. And that just kept like changing and growing, and then kind of through that process of doing my own work, my degree was in like I wanted to help people, and that had always been a part of me. I just didn't know what that would look like. I thought it was just going to look like church ministry, and then that didn't play out. So I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And so it took me a while, but when I thought, what if I was on the other side of the couch? And by that point, I had people who really knew me, friends, sponsors, mentors, my wife, that when I kind of threw that question out to them, they were very affirming and like, this is what you should do. Because it was also energizing to me, the deep, like depth soul work, which then I sort of realized like isn't energizing for everybody.
Yeah. There's a part of it, helping people discover
Yeah.
I think is a big thing.
Yeah.
Like I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I resonate with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that just kind of put me on a path of what could that look like. Ended up going back to grad school in Nashville and got my degree, which was like therapy in and of itself. Started a private practice right after grad school, which is what I'm doing now. And 30,000 foot view, which probably missed a lot of things of just me personally.
It's good. I mean, it's fun to hear y'all story. So how long have you had your private practice at this point?
Maybe almost 2.5 years.
2.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And you're
I'm at Duck River Mental Health, so it's a group practice down here in Columbia, and kind of started as like a consultant to a different practice, but now we've kind of made a group. But I've been doing that for a year, and I was at a larger counseling practice. I ended up working at Refuge, where I got my first experience of counseling. Yeah.
Gotcha.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I wasn't allowed to intern there in grad school because I had been a client there.
Okay.
But after a certain amount of time, they let you apply if you want to. And so I did a postmaster's fellowship year there.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I love the friendship y'all have. I think it's rare, incredibly rare. And we met earlier to talk about merch for the 3%.
Yeah.
And I think it's time to talk about the 3%.
Let's do it.
So with Duck River Mental Health and with your practice, like, how do you see the 3%? Like, what's kind of the mission of it? What does it mean for people who don't know? And then what do
I
you?
bet a lot of people don't know yet. But we're gonna
Literally,
let them know.
you guys know.
They're about to find out.
Yeah.
What does it mean? What's the mission? And kind of what's the big vision for it?
Right.
Well, I'll say what it means, and then you can fill in any gaps I miss. So in the course of our friendship, we met in this really sacred space of vulnerability of Sexaholics Anonymous, 12-step recovery, and kind of found that in those rooms there was a really, what I call a sacred version of honesty, something that you walk in and it feels holy to be around. And that didn't exist anywhere for me that I had experienced before.
Because I'll just interject real quick, there's nothing, at least I've experienced, more vulnerable that is really unspoken than showing up in a room like that.
Yeah.
Because if we both show up there, we're both admitting there's this thing that is deeply connected to my sexuality
and my identity,
which is like the most vulnerable aspect of us that I struggle with, and that culturally is viewed as this.
Right.
And I'm here because I need help. Like it doesn't get much more vulnerable than that.
Yeah.
Right.
And in the realm of like showing up in 12-step rooms, it's the deepest, most vulnerable.
Right.
That we've both gone to different types of 12-step meetings, whether for research or school or whatever. All of them are wonderful. This one is so deeply tied to who you are as a person, and
that's a good point.
Such a cultural.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, we made the joke earlier that AA might meet in the recovery house, but they have the guys from SA go meet in the portable out back.
Yeah.
Or the basement.
Or the basement.
Yep.
Something like that. I think most of our meetings are in a basement.
Anyway, sorry, you were talking about the
creepy.
Yeah, it does make it sound creepy.
Yeah.
But it really does, it is really a sacred space. And even in that space, we found that the people in there were 97% honest. We felt that we were, this is, totally made up statistic. But
this is a theory. This is not evidence-based.
Armchair. Okay. But 97% honest. And the 3% that they kept to themselves is the 3% that we viewed doomed them to loneliness, doomed ourselves to loneliness. This wasn't made up for other people first.
Right.
This was made up so that we would have the self-permission to share the thing with each other that we did not want to share. But it was that thing that was keeping us going back to our addiction.
Yeah.
Right.
And so loneliness to us is what leaves you the most vulnerable to problems of disconnection.
Right.
And so I would call them up and be like, I need to share my 3% with you it would give me the permission I needed to share something that I'm basically in that saying, you're about to know me and I need you to love me.
Right, right.
And so this
So
idea,
vulnerable.
And that they don't run away.
right?
And even just that, like the structure or the language or the label around 3%, because 97% honest, can we just say, is
Rare.
way more than
Yeah.
I ever experienced.
Yeah, very rare.
So it's still like hugely transformative, but like you're saying, that last piece. But even when you call and say, hey, I need to share my 3%,
Yeah.
it tells the other person, okay, I need to
stop.
I need to
If
be
I'm
here
busy,
for
I need
you.
to not
Yeah,
be busy.
Like, this is
yeah,
serious.
let's lock in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even like when we have conflicts with each other,
Mhm.
we'll call and we'll say, I need to, like, I have some 3% that I need to say something hard.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps too, because it expresses, this isn't easy for me to talk about either.
Yep.
I don't want to have conflict with you.
Right.
And so the idea of 3% as a brand, as a,
Call it a brand.
Yeah.
it's the intention is to be a kind of this mental wellness, or what you were talking about earlier about generational patterns. We have a different word for it in therapy, but really it's a generational pattern of dishonesty.
Yeah.
And we want to engage with generational patterns of dishonesty and help break them in a way that's not shame-inducing, but rather brings in the freedom of what's possible through honesty.
Yep.
So good.
Without necessarily maybe the stigma of you're going to therapy or
Sure.
you're in a
Yep.
group therapy.
Right.
Just like all the beauty of 12-step without having to be an addict,
Mm-hmm.
or at least a proclaimed one.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Wow. That's
Anything
huge.
I miss?
Oh, I think that sums it up.
What
yeah.
would you say? How do you see that working out then, practically speaking? What's your vision for? Okay, that's our idea for what the 3% is going to be, but we're going to walk it out. I mean, you might not know all the details, but what would you love to see?
Yeah. Well, so we've been talking about this. We've been ideating on it, if that's a word, for the better part of a year. And so we have lots of ideas, I think,
Yeah.
which is kind of what you're asking, right? Like practically, what does this look
Yeah.
like? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so why we met with you guys is one practical piece of it is a merch line.
Yeah.
That just fosters conversation around this idea, and kind of like a doorway into like, oh, what does 3% mean?
Right.
If you see a shirt that has a cool
Mhm.
logo that
Yep.
is not cheesy, which in our experience, most like mental health related
Mm-hmm.
designs for men are that, which is okay, but just not our
You
style.
just want to be different.
Yeah, how do
Right.
you bridge those two and make it cool, but also something that can elicit a conversation similar to this? So that's one aspect of it, and then big goal. There's dreams for 3% groups, which is kind of like a
Like, is group therapy without being therapy? It's a group to help have a place where when you walk in the door, I'm choosing to be honest here.
It's like radical
Yeah.
honesty.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is my practice ground for a type of honesty that I can take back to my family.
Yeah.
and it looks like some practical resources. Maybe it looks like retreats or like weekend kind of things for men, and even for dads and sons to even really what we're wanting to do is create spaces, and both like literal but also not literal for experiential spaces for people to change.
Yeah.
It feels so
Yeah.
vague, but we're still kind of working out like
Right.
the vehicle of that.
Right.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think the beauty behind a retreat, which, I would love to talk even after this about that kind of topic, but is that the culture when you show up is massive.
Mm-hmm.
And if you give people space to be radically honest and you have experiences together, which breeds connection for men, because men can't connect just sitting on the couch.
Yep.
They have to go do something.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so, that will foster change. It has to.
Yeah.
There's no other result.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, in addition to therapy, like some of the most transformative conversations that have happened for me, which we'll experience this weekend, is like sitting around the fire,
It's the best.
smoking cigars, and we're just like
Being honest.
Yeah.
Creating space.
I've started telling people I will never show up to a men's breakfast at Panera ever again. If you want to meet me, I will be by a fire.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's something different about it.
It is. It's so magical.
Also, people can listen to you at Panera.
Yeah.
I don't want to share cheap things at Panera. But like, just being honest.
I don't want the cooks judging me, you know? So,
Right.
Yeah.
but
I think we don't want to. I think where we're at right now is we don't want to be creating something where we're making ourselves the guru of some version of mental health, but rather giving you a space to find out what does this look like for me in a way that's both helpful to me and my family.
Right.
Because if we create a curriculum of this is how you become healthy, if that fails, it might be because it doesn't align with who you are and it aligns with who we are.
Sure.
And so we really want to create the space for you to create connections with people who will help you pursue this in a way that's most appropriate to you. And at a great scale, a scale that you couldn't do if we just taught you a few tools.
Yeah,
We will teach tools at these things, but the whole goal of it is have the space to connect with yourself and connect with others in a way that you can take it out of there and then use it in your family.
Yeah. That's really good.
Yeah.
I think I went on a retreat October of last year, and it was the greatest thing that probably happened to me in the past 5-10 years or more. I mean, it's insane. So what I didn't expect was how the home life would change when I got back, because I was better, like huge. So kudos to you guys for wanting to create something like that for these men to come home and have a different home life, to create a different home life.
Yeah, the big goal one of the big goals for both of us is to be able to create experiences eventually that span the the lifespan of being a father with your kid. Both, we don't know what that looks like gender-wise. He has a daughter. I'm about to have a daughter. I already have a son. But like from just a example perspective, we want to have like for fathers and sons a retreat at age 6 that allows you to have an experience where you connect over fun. And then another experience at age 8 where you're engaging with honest conversation for the first time, so they know what that is to be modeled. And then a couple years later, you're having a very specific conversation about things that are not normally discussed, or maybe you didn't grow up having them discussed. And then a 13 where you're checking in about going into teenage years, and then 16 what it's like to be at an age of transition, and then 18 what it's like to be a man and what you want to be. A whole cohort of experiences with other dads and you and your kids, where you can go through this experience of growing as a father together with other fathers and growing in honesty with your kids. And hopefully over the course of those experiences, you're breaking generational patterns of sin in your family.
I'm reading a book right now called Iron John, and I think he's the guy who inspired Eldridge to write a bunch of his stuff. But one of the things in the book that I read very recently was there's something around the age of 8 for all kids, sons and daughters, where they just change, and the connection between fathers and their kids, like the dynamic just changes. So like for you to say a trip with experiences at age 6 and age 8, pivotal. And then, also was reading how, for single moms, they can't initiate their sons. They will never fill that void. And so to have fathers, and maybe there's some rite of passage that happens at this age 13 where it's like, hey, one night it's just going to be like kind of a little tribal, maybe, I don't know, but just really like kind of just wild. But for sons to walk away and not have to question, like, do I have what it takes? So
Yeah, because we also come at this with very different, I mean, we kind of alluded to it already, different, if we're just talking about dads, experiences with our dads, where mine was just completely emotionally absent, physically present, but absent in so many ways. and don't want to speak for you, but yours was like present in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
and so good in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
and there were just some conversations that maybe didn't happen that
Totally. Or happened in a way that were harmful, unintentionally harmful.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
aligning like porn use with losing your integrity over every time you use. It's like a model from a big ministry who taught dads to teach their kids this way in a way
So
that
much
was
shame.
not research-based and very harmful.
Yeah.
And eventually that ingrained in me that every time I made that choice, I lost a part of me to this sin.
Right.
Yep.
And
Which just keeps you in the cycle.
it totally keeps you in the cycle.
Well, why not?
Right.
Why not just keep going? You've
Right.
already given up so much.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But
of course.
is that my dad trying to lie to me? No, man.
Right.
That's my
No.
dad trying to love me in the best way that he knows how because
Right.
he was already breaking
exactly
something from
right.
his parents.
Right.
He had the conversation. Wow. Breaking
That's
generational
progress.
sin
Yeah.
by itself.
Right.
Yep.
And that didn't help me.
Yeah. Right.
But you're going to get it more right than your dad did.
Yeah. And he got a lot of things right.
Yeah.
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 So it's like we
It's-
get this
it's both
grand
and.
opportunity to
Yeah.
course correct even a little bit more.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, some of these things are even modeled after like some of the trips he took me on an experience at 11, 13, and then
That's
he had a dinner with men who were pivotal in my life for each of the kids in my family at 18.
Wow.
Wow.
Bring a book and a quote that inspired you in your manhood and have all those people around the table.
Oh
Come
my
on, man.
gosh. That's so
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Didn't have
He got a
That's-
lot of things
Wow.
right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I didn't have any of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say most
Yeah.
sons didn't.
Yeah. So incorporating that and acknowledging here's where it didn't serve me.
Sure.
And here's where we can make that better while acknowledging what a gift that he pursued us.
Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's so intimidating thinking about. I've got two boys. I got 2 girls, 2 boys, and you know my oldest boy's 4, and got a friend that he's got same age kids, same gender, and we've started the conversation of like, how do we need to change to be able to initiate our sons into manhood? It doesn't start when they're 13; it starts now. Like, you know, I don't camp, but I want to take my son camping. How do I need to make that actual practical change and like deal with my own insecurities, you know? It's like watching the progression of what you're saying of having these groups for men so that they can have this with their sons. Like it starts here, but it's so much more than them, you know, having a full life, which is great. But it's very intimidating at the same time, I think, to sit around the table and talk with dads and be like, I have no idea what the crap I'm doing.
Yeah.
No clue.
Yeah.
And even if it was good, it doesn't mean that I know how to do that because my son is different than I am.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's even hard thinking about like my oldest son is very different than me. He even physically, he looks like my whole wife's side of the family. I'm like, yeah, you're not tall and super thin, you know, like I don't know how that feels even physically. So there's like that kind of thing, like how do I connect with you? And but I do feel the favor, you know, of the Lord of like, but you can try. It's not going to be perfect and it's not going to be everything that he needs, but I would rather attempt to fill that gap and the role that God's given to me as his dad. As opposed to being like, I don't know, I don't want to do it until it's perfect.
Right.
Like that's not going to serve him well. That's going to bring shame in the future and guilt and regret. But man, it's hard even now thinking about like we haven't started anything, but I'm like, man, am I enough? Am I enough as his dad to be who he needs to learn what it is to be a man? You know, like there's so much there.
Yeah.
It brings up all the stuff in me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is great though, but I love that you're creating that space for men to just say, here I am.
Yeah.
Here I am.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do this.
Yeah, because what you just named, in that it brings up all the stuff in you, and all my therapist parts are like,
Firing.
yeah.
You're welcome.
We tell you something. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
No, but really, like,
Can we have
all
a
the
session
stuff
right now?
that it brings up in you, and your willingness to engage all of that stuff and work on it, and our willingness to engage and work on it,
Right.
is what is like the pathway to provide for him what you want.
Right.
Right. Like, so many of my clients that are grown men, or even that are dads, it's like, man, something's happening in you that I don't like, or I don't know what to do with, and it's triggering all this stuff in
Yep.
me. And
Yep.
what we typically want to do is control or change or fix
Yes.
you so this thing goes away,
Yes.
rather than like dealing with what happens in me. And so
Right.
even that conversation around like, how do you talk to your son about sexuality or
Right.
about
Right.
porn and the things
Right.
that he's going to see?
Yeah.
And
It's
when-
inevitable.
Right.
And
Yep.
when?
Yes.
It's like, well, the first step is how does it make you feel, even having that
Mhm.
conversation?
Right.
Because if I can't address
Right.
what happens in me around that, then subconsciously I'm gonna kind of try to change
You.
me through helping him.
Mhm.
So hard.
Yeah.
And the other thing that came to my mind when you were talking is like, I think a big kind of pillar of 3%. Because you were mentioning, I think that when you were mentioning the camping and like the
Yeah.
initiation is a lot of what we see, I think, in these things and these experiences, which is I'm not dogging any of these, but it's very heavy on the, like, what would you say? I think you know where I'm going.
I don't think I know. Where
Very
you're
heavy on like the
He's clueless.
masculine, the like.
Oh yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, there's a
I
few.
understand.
There's a few programs that are like just
Build a fire.
heavily masculine
Yeah.
and just like
Sure.
almost the bootstrap mentality.
Yeah.
The
And-
macho man.
Yeah,
Mhm.
macho man,
Yeah.
and
Without calling that toxic, it's not just it's not necessarily toxic. It's just incomplete.
Yeah, it's not the
Yeah.
full
Yeah.
picture.
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think a big passion of ours is blending that, because that is important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we could say like the feminine,
The arts or
just
Yeah, the-
or
yeah,
just
the
whatever
soft.
comes to your mind when soft, because
Yeah.
I think that's kind of
Knitting.
typically what we think of.
knitting.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
love
we're gonna
that.
do knitting.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
But the softness of the feminine and the strength of the
Right.
masculine,
Yeah.
which is, I mean, is like
Yeah.
that's
The
Jesus.
full picture
For
of
sure,
who God
yeah.
is.
And
yeah.
Yeah.
for married fathers who like lose their spouse,
Mhm.
like all of a sudden they have to become nurturing,
Mm.
and a lot of men don't know that that's actually in the tank until it's needed.
Yeah.
You can't. It's hard to nurture when you haven't been nurtured.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, and I would say too, like, if I think about when I was a kid, it wasn't the wrestling with my brothers that I remember. It was like when I would hear a song, that would make me tear up
Mm.
as a 6-year-old. And the power in something like the arts.
Mm-hmm.
So I love what you're saying, like, oh yeah, it's both and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
both ends.
It's like I'm gonna throw the ball with my son, but I'm also gonna be like, hey, come sit at the piano with me. Like,
Mhm.
I want you to hear this.
Yeah.
What does this do? And you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
cultivating both. I don't know. That's great. I love
Yeah.
that.
I think also two things that came up for me as you were talking is like, I think the beautiful thing is you were saying how you don't know how to be what the experience is like to be your son because of
Right.
how different you are, and like you're not a camper and all this.
Right.
I think the part of what I love about what we're trying to create is there are definitely a lot of things that I am not
Mm-hmm.
and might not be right for my son. And this space is for you to have sounding boards and people to connect with who
That's
that is
good.
their thing.
That's
Mhm.
good.
And it's like, if
Yeah.
I told you had to camp with your son
Mhm.
6 times in his life, but I don't do that.
Mhm.
It's like, that's a curriculum. I'm trying to give you a space to find the connections you need to be the father you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, That's good.
And so, like, you choosing to be honest about that in that space allows you to deal with your parts that show up. Like Blake was saying, like, what gets in your way from you to show up for him in that.
Sure.
And then also find the connections to help you show up in the way that's uncomfortable for you, maybe.
Yeah.
And I think that's an amazing thing to be able to, like, when we're not choosing how you need to do it, you get the freedom and the creativity to try.
Right.
And I think the greatest gift that any of us as parents have is the ability to choose to apologize when we get it wrong.
Yeah.
I think the biggest generational changer of honesty is how are you honest when you're wrong? And I think
I'm so good at that.
yeah, like when
Ask
it's
my wife.
right. It's
What's
like
the number? I'll call her.
it's already hard to be honest about stuff where it's not inherently right or wrong. But when we've messed up,
Right.
especially to our kids who like the identity of being the dad, boy, it gets in the way of being honest with our kids. And part of that is like, it's okay that we have the limitation that shows us we need the humility to believe that we are not Jesus. And the expectation on ourselves to act as Jesus to our kids perfectly is unfair to us and gets in the way of us being soft with our kids.
Yeah.
It's good.
And I think having a space where you can express your limitations and also say, can somebody help me in these limitations so that I can be what my son needs? I think that is, I get freaking just amped thinking about it.
And then you get to leave with a dope T-shirt that you wear to play basketball in.
That's
and
right.
some guy goes, "What is that?" And then you get to tell him about it.
You get to explain it experientially too.
Yeah.
I'd
Which
wear
would
it
be sweet.
camping. So
Yeah.
wear my shirt camping.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it'd be sweet.
Well, I think we want to cap it here. I feel like we're
There's so
At
much
a
more
good-
We could
talk
talk
about.
for hours.
I know.
but I feel like we've covered a lot,
Yeah.
like hearing y'all's story and
Yep.
kind of where things are headed. Super excited for y'all.
Yeah. Thankful
you.
to be part of the
Yeah.
process too.
Yeah.
Honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, we're thankful for you
Big
guys.
deal.
That
Yeah.
was really inspiring to meet with you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks for your honesty and
Yeah.
just telling your story, and we'll be here, be your friends along the way. So
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks guys.
Excited for what we're going to do.
Really cool.